Has the Nintendo Switch 2 reveal destroyed anyone else's ability to play games? Recently, due to some stuff in my personal life, I was given the excuse to shelter in place and do nothing for a couple days. And when gifted with some of this newly found free time, I thought this was a perfect opportunity to try and tackle some of my backlog. So I sit down, just me and my Nintendo Switch, and when choosing from my vast catalog of unplayed games, I realized that I didn't want to play any of this for at least another couple months. With the Nintendo Switch 2 and its fancy superior hardware and confirmed backwards compatibility on the horizon, it feels like it would be a waste to get started on anything new because it's all too likely any given game will be getting some kind of enhanced edition fairly soon. For example, when I first booted up Tears of the Kingdom, I was convinced that this was one of the greatest games ever made. It was this crazy swan song of the generation, a cultural moment from the trailers alone, and from the first second of the game, you know that things are going to be different. Everything is much darker, Ganondorf is a shambling corpse, Zelda might be dead. Right off the bat, it's something far more dramatic than the series usually tackles, and then it hits you with this moment. Whew! I think this game might be pretty good. Tears of the Kingdom knows it's a big deal and has no trouble reminding you of just how massive this adventure is going to be before you even start the game proper. And of course, the game delivers on that promise. The central abilities of building machines and fusing objects to your weapons sound like small changes on paper, but in execution, it means every little thing you find can be another tool in the toy box for the player. In prior Zelda games, you'd find something that you couldn't interact with, only to discover that this is a poop door, and it only opens when you hit the poop switch with the poop launcher that you find in Dungeon 5, so you'll have to leave and come back for it later. Meanwhile, in Tears of the Kingdom, you can fuse a cart to your shield and use it as a skateboard. And that sense of freedom permeates throughout the entire experience. Everywhere you go and everything you do asks the player the same question. How do you want to tackle this? This town needs a bunch of wood. Do you go out and cut down each tree one by one, or do you cut down all the trees, fuse them into a giant car, and drive it back that way? Freedom really is the name of the game here. You're doing things your way when you want to, and there's not much else in the gaming world that prioritizes player choice so heavily. This one has become pretty contentious in fandom circles, and I get why. It's a pretty heavy departure from Zelda's past, but its direction is so unique that I have a hard time seeing it as anything less than a masterpiece. And that's saying a lot, considering this game is literally built off the back of its predecessor. I think Tears of the Kingdom is one of the greatest games to come out this generation. I love everything about the world, these characters, the gameplay. The only problem is, I still haven't finished it. Switch 2 rumors were coming to a boiling point around the same time, and it felt like the odds of this game getting some kind of performance upgrade on that were fairly high, and I want to play this game I love in its best possible state, so then I just started waiting. And I would eventually be vindicated in that choice, because as we all know by now, the Switch 2 is getting a Tears of the Kingdom port, one that's locked at a consistent 60 FPS and has much shorter loading times. And a part of me wishes that I had just never started the game so my first experience could have been the best one. And this is a problem I've been having very frequently lately. We live in an era where games are being re-released, remade, and updated left and right, and as someone who wants to experience everything the gaming world has to offer, deciding when to tackle these titles is an exercise all in itself. And listen, I'm far from the first person to have a near insurmountable gaming backlog. It's a gamer rite of passage to buy too many things from a Steam sale that you never end up playing, but it's undeniable that the culture around game releases and how meaningful they actually are has changed significantly, and it's only made this problem much worse. It's easy to forget nowadays, but the idea of a game library persisting between console generations used to be a pipe dream. Before the PS5 and Xbox Series pioneered with their day one out-of-the-box backwards compatibility with basically everything that came out on their predecessors, it was expected that you would have a sort of reset with every new console. And this made it so the games that did cross that generational border had some kind of weight to them. Maybe it was a remake of a beloved classic. Maybe the game's been reinvented with a new control scheme. Maybe there was no significant differences, but the game was lucky enough to release in that weird window where the two consoles overlap. adapt. A console's library used to really mean something, and that's something we're kinda losing with our newest players. The PlayStation 4's library bred some modern classics, a lot of heavy hitters that would shape the industry in the coming years. The PlayStation 5's library is that, alongside like 12 other games. And while this backwards compatibility is great for the consumer, especially as a former Wii U owner, these companies realizing that they could repackage older content on new hardware has had a bit of a domino effect on the industry. A not insignificant chunk of the initial value of the PlayStation 5 was playing older games with a new coat of paint. A choice that was probably made because the system launched underbaked. When a shorter Spider-Man and an unwanted spin-off of a beloved classic failed to turn heads, at least you had all your older games with enhanced performance ready to go. And if this mentality had only been a thing towards the launch of the system, I would be willing to give it a pass. But to this day, we are still getting weird, frankly superfluous PS5 upgrades. Remember Days Gone? The weird open-world zombie game that people only talk about because the creator went off the deep end on Twitter? Well, it has a PS5 upgrade now, and this one you have to pay for. Are you ready to replay it with slightly better graphics? Emphasis on slightly. And that's the thing that really kills me with all these PS5 remasters. The games already looked fantastic. We've hit a ceiling on video game graphics. I can barely tell the difference between the best looking PS4 games and PS5 titles, yet I'm supposed to believe that this looks bad enough to justify a PS5 Pro for $700? And this argument applies to retro titles too. I remember a time where a game from the late 90s, early 2000s re-releasing on modern platforms was considered a big deal. But now every random piece of garbage from your childhood has a 4K 60 FPS port on Steam that features at least 50 game-breaking bugs that you need to read about beforehand. Recently, I got my hands on a copy of the 2016 remaster for Marvel's Ultimate Alliance, which has been famously hard to find due to copyright issues. I grew up with Ultimate Alliance, I attribute this game to me becoming a Marvel fan in the first place, and I was so excited to play a definitive version of this game, especially because so much of the game's content was scattered across different platforms for the original release. And upon booting up the remaster, I discovered that it was significantly broken and has been all but abandoned by the community, and it would have been much easier, as well as much cheaper, to just go out and find a cracked version of the original release and play that instead. I want to support official releases, but so many of them are just slapped together low-effort ports so that people who were nostalgic for the original will purchase them and then hopefully never play them lest they discover that these were actually put together by a series of gorillas with typewriters. For every port or remaster that completely understands the assignment and delivers wholeheartedly, there's 4 or 5 low-effort cash grabs that only exist so the license holders can line their pockets a little more. For every rare replay, there's a lollipop chainsaw repop. And these are all complications that we have to take into account before we even begin to think about DLC, because DLC is a whole other mess. Back in the day, when a game would release, that would be it. But nowadays, everything has to be a thing. Live service games like the Fortnites of the world have set a standard for games never truly fizzling out, and this has created a lot of problems for the people trying to rival Fortnite's drive. Every multiplayer game is now some kind of persistent online world, something you need to be checking into every single day or else you're missing out. And if a game doesn't succeed in these elements, it's a failure. Both corporate side and community-wise, player numbers are constantly used as a metric of success, even if long-standing multiplayer like that was never the goal. I see people clowning on Dragon Ball Sparking Zero of all games for not maintaining a healthy player base, and it's like, do you not have a friend to play this with? I hate to be that guy, but this game was clearly made for people to boot up with a buddy instead of searching for online randos. But in 2025, the idea of a casual multiplayer title like that just doesn't exist anymore. I yearn for the days of every AAA game having some kind of niche multiplayer component just chalked onto the side. I remember being very charmed by multiplayer and stuff like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Uncharted 4, The Last of Us, and BioShock 2. But you don't see stuff like that anymore because multiplayer is expected to persist. Everything is expected to persist. So there's this whole subgenre of game that basically faded away overnight purely because they weren't good enough at trapping you for months on end that no one ever talks about. There's no pick up and play multiplayer games anymore. Everything is a job with daily login bonuses and battle passes. So many games that I was once interested in trying have now become monolithic hurdles with how exclusive they feel this deep into into their lifespan. Like, not only has this game been out for almost a decade, but it costs $200 to unlock all of the characters. And that's on sale! No matter what genre, it's impossible to hop into a quick multiplayer match. You're always assaulted by pop-ups and chores to do and promises of something greater if you give just a little more time, and it all compounds to create an environment where it's almost impossible to do anything without feeling like you're wasting your time. And I can't even say that this is a problem unique to multiplayer games anymore, as more and more single-player games have some kind of live service element to keep track of. Ubisoft is by far the biggest perpetrator of this. I remember being very excited to boot up Far Cry 6 when it came out a couple years ago, but I was greeted by a lot of the same garbage that I play single-player games to avoid. An online shop, seasonal missions, and a currency that can only be obtained by an admittedly charming niche multiplayer component. For what it was, this game was pretty good. But again, I ultimately never ended up finishing it because every time I would log in, it felt like so much had changed between sessions. It never felt like I had everything available to me. And this is a problem with basically any game that has DLC. Post-game content updates have redefined games in the past. You look at stuff like Cyberpunk or No Man's Sky or the near infinite amount of games that launch some form of broken in the PC world, and you have a pretty strong motivator to wait a couple years for everything to be tied together nicely before you play. But if you do that, you run the risk of the game getting a re-release on a next-gen console, which might break it more, which might mean you need to wait for more patches. And then before you know it, it gets another remaster, and then you realize that you're wanting to play a game made in 2013 in 2025. And at a certain point, stuff like this begins to harm more than it helps. GTA Online is a game on life support. In 2013, no one was quite doing it like Rockstar. This ever-evolving online ecosystem was novel in the world of gaming, and that made it easy to ignore how impossible it was to do anything. The GTA Online experience is one of menus and loading screens. Everything is so cumbersome and takes 15 more button presses than it should. Something as simple as trying to get into a multiplayer lobby with friends can be a 10-minute adventure if you're unlucky, and everything in the game feels like this. There's been so many years of content and mission types that trying to navigate any of it as a new player, or even as someone who just took a year or two off, feels like a Herculean task. The best part of a live service game is its ability to evolve, to be ever-changing. One Fortnite season can look drastically different from another, and that's awesome. But when a game keeps adding new content with no regard of how it will fit in with the old stuff, you get a bloated mess that doesn't even tonally feel like the same game anymore. This was considered the best car in GTA Online when it first released. But now you can get this, or this, or this. And that need to keep upping the ante has destroyed any form of consistency. I think anime games have this problem the worst. Bandai Namco has this habit of endlessly chugging out DLC for their games, and considering anime games are usually made with the specific context of what's happening in their source series at the time of release, you get these weirdly out-of-place characters forced into older set pieces. My favorite example of this is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle. This game was released before the JoJo anime really took off and became the cultural juggernaut it is today, so it's full of these weird oddities of characters who look and feel pretty different from how most people would come to know them. But then in 2022, they re-released the game on modern hardware and added a bunch of new characters without changing much of what was already there. Like, it's pretty obvious that most of the new folks on the roster were only chosen because they were fan favorites or funny memes, but all of these guys are portrayed fairly differently in the anime than they are in the original manga, and it results in the final roster feeling like a strange mishmash of character movesets that were developed in two completely different contexts. When the game originally released, Josuke here only had a handful of manga chapters to his name. He was the freshest of fresh faces, and that led to him only having a small pool of abilities for them to craft a moveset out of. And in the re-release, the only two characters from this part of the story are this incomplete moveset and the literal final boss. And it just doesn't feel right. At what point does stacking on more and more content onto an already old title begin to harm the final product? Yeah, maybe there's more stuff here, but if all it does is serve to remind me of how disjointed and convoluted this game's development was, is it really worth it? It lacks vision. It's just more game for game's sake. There's no clear goal anymore. And to that angle, I guess I can relate. Remember when this video was about the Switch 2? We're a couple months out from the release of the Nintendo Switch 2, and from what we've seen so far, this system is everything I want. The first party titles look incredible, the option of mouse and gyro controls alongside its decently powerful specs and portability make this a tantalizing place for third-party options, and it's always fun when a new console hits the market. But even with the promise of so much new content to draw my gaze, the backlog problem is only getting worse. Out of 56 games announced at the Switch 2 Direct, 29 of them were games that you could already play on other platforms. And of those, 12 promised some kind of new feature exclusive to the latest release. And you're expected to pay for all of this at a time where games are getting more expensive than they have ever been. And that's ignoring potential industry implications of recent geopolitical events. Systems may be getting more and more powerful, but that means game development is taking longer and longer. And that means dev costs are going up at exponential rates. And that means it's far easier to just patch new stuff into older games than it is to actually make anything new. In the current gaming landscape, there's never a good time to do anything. There's always something more. I want to finish Baldur's Gate 3, but there's always a new patch on the horizon. I want to finish Tears of the Kingdom, but there's a new console on the horizon. I want to play just a little bit of Marvel Rivals, but I have to grind out a few hours or else I miss out on the opportunity to get the Venom twerk emote. At the end of the day, I am excited for Nintendo's latest, but with the state of the industry and the fact that so much of this system's launch catalog is supposedly superior versions of things I've already played, it's a hollow excitement. The same way I'm excited for more out-of-place DLC in my favorite anime game or another round of hilarious supercars in GTA Online. It's always fun to have more toys to play with, but it's safe, low-value fun, as opposed to the excitement that new experiences can provide. And if we want to get real big picture with it, this isn't just a problem with gaming. Hollywood, television, everything is leaning into being connected to a wider universe because general consumers just want to keep experiencing the same things that they always have. Sometimes it feels like things will never get better, and I'm supposed to just sit here and cheer at the screen as entertainment made specifically to pander to people like 10 years older than me is repurposed for eternity. But hey, at least you can play as the Moo Moo Meadows cow in the new Mario Kart. That's pretty cool. See ya!